I'll just flip this around. But we have him tonight, and one of the biggest things I want to talk about tonight was we're going to talk about his life, his journey. This is kind of a prompt thing from Wednesday night. We were talking, we joked about it until he hit me up and goes, "Are you serious about that?" I'm like, "Yeah, why not? You're up to it." So he has a very interesting story. One thing we encourage everybody who's here and who's on Facebook, ask questions. As you listen to his journey and listen to what God has done for him in his life and different things, he's going to talk about his journey, but he's also going to talk about what he learned from God. I think it's the most important thing, sharing with us, sharing his downfalls and sharing his uprisings. It's going to be cool. And while you're missing that, ask questions. We have Tim, who's going to be moderating on the back end, and he'll be reading the questions out and stuff like that too, which we hope that he can rewrite, because otherwise we might have to fire him and find somebody else. But we love Tim anyways. If you know Tim here, you'll know we're just joking with him. But with that, I want to start out with this, man. You're on the front cover of a local magazine in RVA, man.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
It's actually pretty humbling. You know, when I look at that image, you know, most folks don't know that I went to the University of Richmond, and you know, it took a lot to get to that point. You know, in terms of, you know, coming to Richmond in 1995, basically with $200 in my pocket, and a duffel bag. You know, basically telling myself that, you know, I wanted something different for my life. You know, prior service, military, Marine Corps, and you know, with that there were some challenges. You know, coming back home to Charlottesville, Virginia, and you know, being home for that year, things weren't working out the way I thought they would, and so it wasn't that any sort of particular circumstance, you know, caused me to be quote unquote homeless. You know, and homelessness has a variety of definitions. You know, you can basically think about homelessness from the standpoint of that person that's on the corner with the sign. That was definitely not me. And you can also think about homelessness in terms of there's that one person that's sleeping on people's couches. It might be over here one week, it might be in a hotel the next week, and then it might be somebody else's apartment the following week. And that was pretty much my circumstance when I came to Richmond in 1995. And you know, the goal here was, you know, I wanted to leave Charlottesville because I found myself doing certain things that I knew that my potential was greater than. You know, from fighting in the street, having guns pulled on you, people threatening your life. You know, and it was just like, for me, it was time, because I had seen so much at the age of 21 when I came down, and you know, I just knew there was something bigger and better for me. And so, for those familiar with Richmond, Virginia, I showed up in 1995. In fact, probably 21 years this month. Wow. At Colonial Treehouse Apartments, looking for a place to lay my head. And you know, the goal was to try to get into Virginia Union University to play football, run track, because I had some success in high school with those two sports. And you know, for that couple of months, it was hit and miss, like, you know, just kind of bouncing around from place to place. You know, getting into school and then finally being able to start my bachelor's degree. So, you know, looking back, it was a tough road. But you know, here's a funny thing. You know, I'd always been in church. I'd always known that. You know, I'd always heard about God, but God was never what I would say real to me. You know, it's just kind of like, it's like one of those situations where, you know, your parents kind of drug you to church, and yeah, you know you were going to heaven because you was at church with your mom and dad. Correct. But then when it was like, when you got out on your own, anything that was unchecked as a child or as growing up basically manifested themselves as problems as an adult. Correct. And in my situation, you know, there were a variety of things that I dealt with, namely sexual sin, you know, you know, pornography, you know, fornication. You know, those are things that I struggle with. you know, and then kind of coming here thinking I was getting a break from things back home. Those things followed me.
Yeah, you thought you can run from it, but
and you can't. You know, it's kind of like there's this term that I've always used, like you run to the end in order to start up a new beginning.
Yeah.
But really, that ending is never really over, because if you're trying to do things in your own strength, you can change your environment, you can change your circumstance, but if you haven't dealt with those issues on the inside of you,
Yeah.
you know, those things will follow you, no matter if you're homeless here or living in a 4,000 square foot house 21 years later.
Yeah.
You know, those things, they still follow you.
Yeah.
So, but you know, to kind of, you know, circle back to the whole grit thing, let's just say that is a culmination of a whole lot of pitfalls, you know, 21 years in Richmond. You know,
Correct.
You know, a lot of the things that I dealt with, you know, in the beginning coming down here, are some things that I still struggle with to today.
Yeah.
But you know what? I know that God is faithful.
Yeah.
And I know that He has His hand on my life. You know, the other things that I didn't mention were things like anger and rage.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've watched many a failed relationship.
Yeah.
Due to anger.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the type of anger that was so destructive that it flips, and you would find yourself breaking up everything in your house. And it's like, you know, I look back now, I think there's a combination of things. I think God's love has you know, smoothed some rough edges out. And I also think age also has something to do with it as well. You know, being that I'm 42 now.
Yeah.
You know, but those things, those things were things that I actually struggled with, that really resulted in a lot of things, you know, in terms of issues that I experienced coming here in Richmond.
Yeah.
And then being able to get to a point where now I feel like I'm in a position to be able to give back and to let folks know about some of my struggles. And, you know, because, you know, the word is clear about how one man's testimony will win other men unto salvation.
Yeah.
So, you know, hopefully some of these things that we talk about tonight,
Yeah.
you know, will help some folks out there, you know, in terms of, you know, some of those three themes that I've called out, you know.
Yeah.
And no question is off limits, you know.
Yeah.
We're family, you know.
Yeah.
You're my boy, so you know, I'm an open book tonight, and
Good.
I would love to talk about, you know, some of my shortcomings for the hope that it might help somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, I also would like to celebrate some of my successes as well.
Of course, you can't have the pitfall left the rise.
Yeah.
And if you heard him on Facebook, you know, just know that it's all fair game. Any questions are fair game. We talked about that.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing that's off the table. But
Right.
you know, last Sunday, you know, especially stuff we've been going through this week in the U.S. But it was interesting. Last Sunday we talked about sufferings of Christ, and you know, going through those pitfalls and going through the storms in life. You know, talk about some of the challenges when you first got here. You say you bounced around a lot, but you also told me there was a lot of other stuff you had going on, and we'll talk about that. You had a daughter, you're raising a daughter at one point, you know.
At one point, right.
You know, and I think that speaks to a lot of stuff. But let's talk about some of the going from homelessness to actually having a place for yourself.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, it was interesting. You know, there was a woman in my life. She's a mother of my daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and she was pivotal in helping me get my feet on the ground.
Okay.
You know, while you know we did attempt the marriage thing, and it didn't work out for a variety of reasons. You know, a lot of which I fought myself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just because of, you know, there's a lot of emotional things that I dealt with. I guess you know, 20 years ago, you know, they didn't really have a term for post-traumatic stress disorder, but that's
correct.
You know, after going through counseling and things of that nature, that is exactly what I was dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as far as the anxiety, the fear, the insecurity, and just rage. And you know, any man dealing with that, you know, and they have a woman in their life or a wife, and a girlfriend and or a wife in my instance, you know, those types of things. It takes a special woman to be able to put up with that and actually stick around.
Correct.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But you know, long story short, she helped me find a place, a friend of hers, to actually lay my head down. You know, so I remember the $200. You know, I gave the guy $150 to lay my head down for 2 to 3 weeks. And then I think I took the rest of the money and actually spent it on food, just to kind of keep myself going. And then in the meantime, I was, going back and forth to Virginia Union, trying to convince the coaches there on the football team to give me a shot. And the guys was like, well, how fast can you run? Can you catch? And can you, so needless to say, I'm forever indebted to a guy by the name of Coach William Dillon. Not only did he actually give me a shot, he also allowed me to hook up with Coach Dave Robinson. I think you guys know who he is.
Yeah, we do.
One of the all-time winningest coaches in Division II basketball, maybe Division I basketball. Coach Robbins had a rooming house on Bath Street, and they've torn it down now. I mean, the place was a pit. I mean, I'll just be honest, no disrespect, Coach Rob, but you was the slumlord back then, all right? But the house was so bad, it was like, the wind would start blowing, and you can feel the draft in your bedroom. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And it was nuts, and it was like too many things on at once, and basically things would conk out. So you have to go back to the breaker box and do this and do that. But anyway, Coach Rob looked out for me, and I was able to get me a little room in the house, and I shared that with other football players, and we were able to get something going. You know what I'm saying? As far as I finally had a place I could call my own. I mean, I really didn't have much, but it was a one room. It was a rooming house, and I was able to stay there for a period, until I was able to get into school, and I actually got a chance to play football for Virginia Union. This is after getting out of the Marine Corps, transitioning to the reserves and whatnot. And the one thing I didn't mention is that after the Marines, I actually went to another school down in Lynchburg, but was kicked out.
Yeah, I remember
for fighting. Fighting and just a number of infractions. And it was one of those things where it's like there was always a conflict on the inside of me. Who am I? I known about the things of God, but I wanted to be hood. I wanted to be street. But here I am being hood and being street in a college setting, and the two don't mix.
Correct. Correct.
So after the second year in that, what I would call a 1.5 GPA, I was pretty much asked to leave. And that was depressing, because it's like when you come from home and you have a whole lot of people pulling for you, and then you come home and they're looking at you like you screwed up. You're just like everybody else. You ain't gonna really make nothing out of yourself.
Right.
And some of those things actually started to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because back home, before coming back to Richmond and whatnot, I started running the streets a little bit. I won't mention any names, but we had that, what do you call that, 32-ounce private stock crew where our claim to fame every night was go down to the local store. I'll never forget it. I think there were 32-ounce bottles. It was 14 in the case, and I think we paid $13.75 for the headache water. So that's what I was falling into. But couple run-ins in the street. Had a gun pulled on me. Was jumped by 4 guys. Got pistol whipped pretty bad. Messed my eye up and everything like that. But I held my own. Held my own against them. And but the thing is, my life was spared because the guys that I got involved with, one had did some serious crime up in New York City, and so he was about his business. And it was funny how at that moment of truth, how there was that shield of protection. I look at it now, like I mean, back then I might have called it luck, but now I understand that it was God's shield of protection.
Correct.
But those same issues at the school in Lynchburg, the anger, the womenizing, and things like that. I brought all those things here to Richmond. And they did pretty much the same thing at Virginia Union. And that's how what we had talked about before, having my first child. Who's 20 now. Who's might hopefully, I mean, she might be looking at this and like, yo, my dad is a trip, but a lot of that happened, but that's what happened, the young lady I'm speaking of, my ex-wife at this point, you know, she played a pivotal part in helping me get established, you know, and then, you know, helping me stay here and stay there until I was able to get into school and then be able to fend for myself.
Yeah, that's good.
You know, but yeah, so that was a transition. That was over the period of 3 to 4 months.
And you told me that too. Also, we talk all the time. We're really good friends, so we talk all the time. One thing you mentioned to me when you started to go to graduate school, you were working, going to graduate school, and being a single dad.
Yeah.
Talk about that, man. Because I know there's a lot of people out here who struggle. I mean, women too. I mean, we have men and women, single parents, man, that go through stuff, and you know, talk about your struggles and that, and your triumphs and as well.
Well, remember how I talked about, you know, me and we were real tight at one point, but you know, like I said, there's the inner demons that I had on the inside, not demons like, but just things that I dealt with.
Correct.
You know, emotionally, caused me to be really out of whack, and so you know, we tried to work it out, and marriage just didn't work.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately, you know, she decided another relationship was better, and you know, and that took me by surprise, you know, and I talk about this in my book, Release Me to Be a Blessing, where when I found out what she was dealing with, you know, I pretty much scored an attempted murder charge off of that.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, it was that rage thing again. It was that, you know, wanting to get even, and you know, even then, God spared my life, and He spared me having to do serious time. You know, so if you think about I guess the legal system here in Virginia, you know, there's like classes of felonies that you can achieve, right? So in this particular case, I had a class 2 felony, which carried, I think it's like an intent to kill, maim, and all that other good stuff carries, I think, 10 to 15 years of penitentiary. So this happened in 2000, and so technically I was supposed to be getting out around this time.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
But the Lord saw fit, and you know, going through the separation piece, the divorce piece, you know, the courts awarded me custody of my daughter.
Wow.
And at that time, you know, I was doing okay. You know, I mean, emotionally, I was a wreck, but you know, on the surface, the house, you know, the cars, the college degree from Virginia Union that I finally received in 1998. And I was just starting to pursue my master's degree at the University of Richmond at the time. And so, you know, it was a painful period in my life. Because now by that time, my daughter Simone, she was born in 1996. This is 1999, 2000. Me and her mom are now separated, divorced. I'm going through these court cases, you know, looking at time. But somehow I was able to, with God's help, salvage the relationship with my daughter and maintain custody up until the point of her graduating from high school. You know, she's going to be a junior at VCU this year. You know, but here's the thing, man. You know, there's a lot of bad examples out there as far as men are concerned. You know, there's a lot of bad examples out there as far as women are concerned, as it relates to raising a child. You know, me and my ex-wife did what we could. You know, while we had our main issues, you know, she was there for her daughter, so I would never let someone know that or think that, I was a single dad and I did it all by myself. You know, while she did decide to move to another city, you know, she was still played an integral part in my daughter's life. But to keep it real, I was the one that had to learn how to do hair. Okay?
Yeah.
You know, the pigtails, the ponytails. You know, had to learn how to do hot oil treatments and, you know, and how to wash and shampoo and condition. And it's kind of funny now that I own a barbershop, but I kind of started off as a quote unquote kitchenologist or cosmetologist. Like just learning how to do my daughter's hair because that woman wasn't there to help me do that.
Correct.
Okay? So having to work, deal with my emotional stuff, raise a daughter. You know, she was 4 years old at the time. You know, it was tough. You know, I was going to school, trying to get this degree going, and I also had 2 part-time jobs trying to make it happen. Wow. So a lot of that part of my life is a blur.
Yeah.
It really is a blur because, you know, some of my friends to this day show me major love. You know, my friend Carlos Akendo, okay? I remember how he would allow me to drop my daughter off at his house while I went to school and then worked a service shift at the Red Lobster. All right, now you know why I love crab legs so much. At the Red Lobster,
Yeah.
And then go pick her up and then get her home, get her ready to go to school, and it was just a routine. My buddy Linwood Cousins and his wife, you know, it was sort of the same thing. I had this support system, this amazing support system of folks who kind of knew what was going on, you know, and knew what I was up against, and you know, they was there for me. But you know, here's the other thing. I want to also say too that there were a lot of naysayers that were, you know, saying that things to the effect of, you know, little girl doesn't need to be with her father, or you know, she should have been with her mom, or whatever happened. And here's what I would say, you know, as it relates to single parenting and stuff like that. Any woman or any man that uses a child to get back at the other parent is dead wrong. It's dead wrong. Because our goal is to facilitate the relationship between the child and the other parent, if the other parent is trying to be involved.
Correct.
All right. Now, it's not to say that there are situations where, just for the welfare of the child, that other parent shouldn't be involved. You should let the courts decide that. But any woman or any man that's using a child to get back at the other person because of the situations y'all got, you're dead wrong for that. And you should cut it out. You should cut it out because that's not right. You know, because regardless of what issues that me and my ex-wife had, we will always try to work out to the best of our ability, because communication was never a strong point of mine.
Correct.
You know, we tried to work it out in such a way where, you know, it was co-parenting, but I was the one that basically kind of held the weight of it because I was here in Richmond.
Correct.
Right. So, but yeah, that's the kind of a long-winded answer to your question. But you know, that's real talk. Like, I mean, and I'm going to say that again. Like, if you're using your child against the other parent because you're upset because things didn't work out, you should stop. You should cut that out. That's nonsense. You know, take on the mindset that, you know, irregardless of what issues went on between you and the other parent, the goal is to facilitate the relationship. That means that you make it possible for that other parent to work with that child, because that child needs that other parent. Women, you know, if the father's not involved in his life, you know, in his or her life, you know, that's not to say that you have to bend over backwards and try to make somebody be involved. But what I am saying is, if there's a man out there or a woman out there that's really trying to be a part of their child's life, and y'all are tripping and y'all don't want to, you know, help out or anything like that, then you're wrong for that. You should go ahead and put whatever you got going on to the side for the sake of your child, and facilitate the relationship so that way that child can be with that other parent. That's the proper thing to do, because you don't want your child to resent you in the future for not doing that. And to kind of speak on that, my father raised me and my brother. You know, my mom and my dad were divorced at 2 years old when I was 2, and my brother was a baby, 6 weeks old. And one thing that I can say about my father is that my father never bad talked my mom in front of us. I'm certain, you know, we're all human. I'm certain he probably asked for choice words, but he never said it in front of us. Okay, and he never was like, you can't see your mom. You know what I mean? And
he was covering her with love in front of you. He might have been stuff done privately.
Probably so.
And just covering the fact, helping y'all to love her too.
Right.
And I think that's beautiful.
But you know, it's kind of funny that we're kind of going in this circle, because, you know, a lot of what I experienced as a young man coming into my own had a lot to do with my childhood, and because my mom, quote unquote, wasn't in the home or wasn't there.
Correct.
Okay. And I'm happy to say though that my mom, I love her very much. And I think something clicked like around the age of 24 or 25, where I was like, you know what, irregardless of what happened between my parents and my mom wasn't as available as she could have been or whatever, you know, I forgave that situation. I forgave my mom, and my mom is probably one of my best friends to this day. And if I ever needed anything, if our grandkids ever need anything, she's there. And so I celebrate you, Mom, Sarah, you know, but it always wasn't like that. But since we talk about that early childhood, it took me, that early adulthood, it took me a while to really understand that a lot of the hurt and pain that I had, the rage and anger, failed relationships, all had to do with my upbringing and not having access to the other parent for regardless of whatever reason. My father never prevented it, but it never presented itself either.
Correct.
Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So, long story short, again, let the other parent be there for their child if they're willing to be there. Don't prevent that because of what mess y'all got going on between each other.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I'm happy to say Simone is a diva. You know, being raised by a man, she's a diva. She's all woman. You know, she loves her clothes, she loves her shoes. She's a beautiful young woman. And I think back to those naysayers about, you know, he ain't gonna have a mouse or nothing. He'll never have a pot to piss in. I'm like, hey, that's fine and dandy, but look at my daughter. Look at my other children that's coming up behind.
You sacrificed for her a lot.
Oh yeah.
Love, man.
Yeah.
You loved her. I still remember you getting the phone call and you said you had to go take her hair done.
Right.
I was
How
like,
funny is that?
go ahead, George. Is there any questions? Go ahead, Tim. What we got there, man?
Tim said to ask, what helped you to decide to become an entrepreneur?
Good question.
Interesting. The entrepreneur piece kind of came about because that's something that it's kind of funny. It's always been in my family. Like there's a variety of entrepreneurs that I can point to in my family that have done amazing things, that are doing amazing things. But you know, it was about the entrepreneur piece is really not about money for me. It's really about giving back. It's about sharing. It's about taking whatever, what do you call it? Words of wisdom, knowledge, or empowerment, I would like to call, you know, and share that information with everybody else, right? So if you think about the concept of the barbershop has for centuries been the meeting place, you know, for people to come, not only to get service, but to talk about politics, to, you know, to talk about things like relationship advice, you know, to, you know, what's going on in current news and events, you know. But think about the relationship where you have that one-on-one time with that person, whether they're in your chair or they're just involved in the conversation. And that is a primary piece where you can actually drop words of wisdom. And you also have to think about it too, since I'm a Christian man, you know, a lot of the people that we talk to from the general public, you know, hey, that might be the only semblance of the gospel that they might receive all week. It is at the barbershop. You know what I mean? The other thing is too, kind of circling back to my days at Virginia Union, I had this professor by the name of Marilyn Broadus Gay. And Dr. Gay impressed upon us that we need to really focus on empowering each other. Like, you know, the whole concept of, you know, people don't, if you go up to the average person, you ask them like, what does empowerment mean to you? You probably get 50 million different answers. But for me specifically, it's about, you know, how can I encourage another man or preteen or whatever, you know, to pursue his best out of life. You know? And I've always wanted to be in a situation to where you have all walks of life come in, you know, you can talk to folks directly and you can hear what they're thinking about, and then you can hopefully influence, okay, help drive to a decision. So for me, entrepreneurship is about giving back. It's about creating a platform where you can interact with the general public. Well, you know, hopefully you can make some money off of it, but at the end of the day, it's really about building not only the clients that come in, but building the people that work in your shop. You know, for example, there's been, you know, there's one one barber on staff that really wants to open up a school one day. And so we're working with what I refer to the developmental action plan, where we have him on a plan to where he can create a school one day for himself, and then hopefully go off and branch off in the world. There's another person that wants to not only be a licensed professional cosmetologist, but also a licensed professional barber as well. He's already got one, but he wants to dual threat. Me personally, I want to be able to provide this, to have this barbershop be an outreach for the community that it's in. You know, do things like, you know, at one point we was working with a young lady by the name of Ray LeBrie with doing open mic nights. You know, a lot of people from the neighborhood would come in and hear all of this talent from a Christian perspective, which was pretty cool. You know, Brother Josh, you know, he has a clothing giveaway. Yeah. You know, 600 to 1,000 people came last time, if not more.
It was more. It was about, I think,
2,200 people.
Yeah.
So coming to the barbershop to get clothing. So, you know, to answer that question about why I wanted to get into entrepreneurship, you know, it wasn't necessarily really about the money, but it was about the things you can do with the platform that you're given and dealing with the general public. You know, how can I have a legitimate footprint in the community in which I'm serving, and how can I open up avenues for other people that actually interact with me from a simple haircut? How can we help them launch to their own thing?
Yeah.
If I have resources, I want to be able to share those resources.
Correct.
But you know what the funny thing is? Most people cannot believe that there is another person out there that's not in it to take their money. Most people can't understand that there are people that are out there that generally want to help them achieve their goals. And it doesn't necessarily have to be anything in it for me or for those others that are out there. And that's bad. It's like we as a society has drifted from where, you know, we talked about this before about the 4 different types of love. You got agape, you got phileo, which is brotherly love, right?
Yeah.
You got eros, which is romantic love,
yeah.
And then you got stargate, which is like the love that you have for your child.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So the whole concept of phileo, you know, between members of society is a term long gone.
Yeah. Yep.
Just based upon the reaction of, yo, like, is that what you're trying to do? Here, I know this person. Let me network, and let's get you involved in that circle,
yeah.
And let's get you in a place to where now you can shoot your shot. Oh, it's got to be some strings attached. Like, no, there's no string attached to it.
Yep. Yep.
Just take this bit of information and go do you, and let me know how it works out.
Yep.
That's the heart of George West End, the barbershop. And you know, I've had staff members that have been with me up until 4 years, and they still can't get it because they don't understand. But that's really God's love.
Yeah. That's all of it. It's a concept they didn't grow with.
Right.
And you know what? Frankly, we blame ourselves in the church because we act the same way towards each other. I do, Damien. Hopefully that starts to change. That we can just come together to help one another.
Right.
And we start the mindset start to change that. They know that there's no hook and bait and switch, you know.
Right.
It's just genuinely love. You know, I don't care if I don't get anything out of this, but my concern is about helping you.
And that's it.
Yep.
Right. No strings attached. And so, like I said, it's funny to me because it's like sometimes when you're talking to a person, you can look in their eyes, you can tell they don't get it.
Yeah.
They don't understand.
Yeah.
But you know what? That does not absolve me of the fact that I have a responsibility to continue doing what God has asked me to do. And that is to provide a platform, correct, to help other brothers, to help other sisters, no matter what walk of life they're from. I met a brother from, I want to say he's from Sierra Leone, and no, he's from Ghana. He's from Accra, and we, as you know, we're working on the George West End salon suites, and he was like, "How do I do that?" I said, "Brother, let's set up some time. You come on in the shop. I'll roll out the blueprint for you." And I'm gonna show you how to do it. I'm gonna show you what things that you have to, watch out for, because there's some pitfalls that can either lead to a lot of success or bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And he was like, "Well, how much do I owe you?" And I'm looking at him, it's like, why does information always have to cost money?
Yeah.
But like, it don't cost you nothing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
There's enough for everybody out here. So like, when we think about the term entrepreneurship, there's enough for everybody out here.
Yeah, everybody has their own.
You know,
It's
find
always-
your niche and then you get it done.
Yep.
Yeah.
I remember you telling me one time, and I'll let you explain it. He's now married. For all those out there, he's remarried. Miss Carlina, she's a sweetheart.
And she fine too.
Yeah.
Yes.
She want that daughter, don't you?
Yes.
Yes. I remember you telling me it was early on with y'all that there was a time you had your anger came out.
Yeah.
And can you talk about that with me?
Right.
Like we talked about that at one time, and that, dude, I'm telling you right now, that stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't mind sharing that with us, because I think it's a picture of God's love. I mean, that's a beautiful picture of God's love. It's a horrible moment for yourself, but you haven't done it. And I think that's amazing how it changed your life.
Yeah.
Could you tell us what's going on, man? Because
Yeah. So like, you know, hopefully my wife won't, when I get home, throw something at me for even talking about this. You know, I mean, we pride ourselves on being private people, but if these stories and these reflections, I will call them, help some others, then I really believe that she would be okay with that. So, so like, you know, early on in our marriage, you know, there's these things where, you know, like what we refer to as what I guess what we call emotional baggage.
correct.
You know, there was a lot of hurt from failed relationships that I've been into, serious and flings. There was a bunch of flings. Okay, let's just be transparent about that. You know, what happens is when you have those type of scenarios, and now you found someone that wants to spend that life with you.
Yeah.
The reality is, if you haven't checked or if you haven't dealt with those relationships, what I refer to as soul ties, what happens is, you know, what you doing, sign language back there? All right. What happens is you have what I refer to as baggage. You have soul ties. You have things that are attached to you. So it's kind of like, if you was with that girl, in my case, if you was this girl and that girl and that girl and this girl, and it takes God to kind of heal those memories, whether they were good or bad, and then you get with someone else that you're going to actually spend the rest of your life with, that person is now competing with whoever you have spent time with in the past. Okay, so it's kind of like this is an analogy I like to use. I mean, since we're being transparent today, there was always that one girl in your neighborhood that everybody got with, that everybody had a chance to sleep with or hit, whatever your terminology is. And the funny thing is, that woman was never the one that you brought home to mom because you knew that she was a hoe. Let's call it what it is. Okay. The funny thing is though, when we find a good girl that's, you know, what I would say, not well journeyed, so to speak, we expect her to act like,
it's memory. The memory.
See what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
So then what happens is when you're dealing with, and I'm not saying that this is just an example that I'm using, not anything related to my wife, but when you have that kind of situation and now you're in, you know, this relationship, this committed relationship, and now you're trying to put those types of demands of this quote unquote super freak, and you're trying to put that type of expectation on that spouse, that's going to create a strain in your marriage.
Correct.
Okay, because that woman's not built like that. And you didn't marry her for that. You married her because she was what? Wholesome and good and wife material. But then when you get behind closed doors, you expect for her to be everything that she's not. So, but in our particular case, I would fault my wife for things that other women had done to me. The breakups, the ex-wife even. You know, and those things would actually result in periods of rage where, you know, it would take nothing for me to flip out and want to break up everything in the house. You know, but God in His providence, you know, He blessed me with a woman that over time has learned me and has prayed for me. And even though I know many times she's wanted to leave, she kind of hung in there. And I didn't make it easy, you know, and that's just not to say that I'm all the way there yet. I'm not. But, you know, I can say honestly that I wholeheartedly trust my wife. And I trust her with my deeper, most, what do you call it? my most deepest sort of fear. You know, not that I'm scared of anything physically, but just hurts, emotions, and things like that. I know that if we have to talk about anything, I can always run to her first, and I can tell her this is what's going on. And it took time to get there. It didn't happen in year 1. It didn't happen in year 2, year 3. We've been married 12 years now. But it took time. It took rough times. It took periods. It took, you know, some separation. It took some, you know, I would call intense fellowship to get us to a point where it's like, okay, I kind of understand how she ticks. And hopefully she kind of sees how I tick. You understand? So, but it was rough in the beginning because what the mistake that I was making was I would compare her to women from the past.
Correct.
Even including my mom, because that, you know, things like, I know you're going to leave because everybody else is left.
Yeah.
You know, but she hasn't left.
Yeah.
And prayerfully she won't leave. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But, you know, the reality is this, you know, like, it's kind of like the mentors that we've had. Mentorship in marriage is critical.
Yeah.
Right? And when I say marriage, I'm talking about marriage between a man and a woman. All right? I mean, let's define that based upon, I'm a Christian man, that's how I look at things, all right? But there's no disrespect to the world's definition of marriage.
Yeah.
I have, you know, that it is what it is. But what I would do, just to be clear, I'm going to rephrase and call what I would be married. I'm going to call it covenant.
Yeah.
My covenant with my wife is so deep, and you know, I know that she's the one for me. But it took time to get there, and so anybody that's dealing with like any sort of struggles or anything like that in their relationship, and you're married, then you know it's kind of like you have to put God in the center of that marriage. You can't do that on your own.
Yeah.
Like for example, if you think about the triangle,
Yeah.
right? You're here, she's there, God is up at the top. If I'm looking at her and she's looking at me, and we're not looking at God, we're going to miss each other because God's not in the mix. But if, say, one person's looking at God, but the other person's looking at her, then check it out. You still miss.
Yeah.
Right? But if we're both looking at God, we're going to meet in the center with God in the center.
Yeah.
And then we're going to be able to hopefully resolve the issues. And so I would say anybody that's, you know, freshly married, and when I say freshly married, I'm talking you're probably in your 3rd year, because that's when, like, you know, God, what did I get myself into?
Yeah.
Type of discussion started getting it going.
Been there.
Yeah. I would say hold on.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you're really taking 2 lives and you becoming 1.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's the main thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have a question, Tim? You have a question for somebody?
Yes, someone wanted to know how and or where and when did you meet your current wife?
Where and when?
Yeah.
Actually, it was kind of funny because I was divorced. I just got divorced like 2 or 3 days before I met my wife. And you know, I had a cousin. You know, he was in the Marine Corps at the same time I was in the Marine Corps. So he was living in North Carolina at the time. He was like, "Hey, you know, I want you to meet my my girlfriend. She's his wife now." And so when I met his girlfriend at the time, I was like, "How you doing?" So and so. So, "Oh, you're George. You're the one I've heard so much about."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Yeah, blah blah blah." Cool. So she was like, "You know what?" After we talked about, she's like, "You know, I got this good friend I'd really like for you to meet." And I'm looking at her like, "Come on, man. Do you really understand what I just came out of?
Yeah.
What I'm going through with this little girl?"
Yeah.
I'm like, "I'm not feeling that."
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And she was like, "Whatever. Here's a number. Call her." So it's kind of like, you know, I'm one of those types, man. I'll have like 50 gazillion things in my pockets. And I was hanging out at my mom's house, and you know, I went to sit down and I had to take my phone and everything out, put it all on the table, and there that number was, kind of folded up. And I'm just curious by nature, so I got to looking at it, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna call. So then when I called, I got the gas face. So if you gas face is like, okay, brutal. You know, she just basically blew me off.
Yeah.
Right. So she's like, "Well, I don't know who you are, blah blah blah." So then my curiosity is peaked now. So now it's the competition thing, right? So I'm like, okay, well, all right, I don't even know what she looked like, but I like her spirit because she just said, I don't know, this is really strange. You calling me out of the blue. I don't even know who you are. I know who she is, but why she gave me my number, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And I was like, you'll talk to me again. And she's like, what? I was like, you'll talk to me again. And it's kind of funny. If she's on live right now, she's probably going to kick me when I get home. But, you know, it was, so we got to talking. And I said, can I call you later? And she said, yeah. And I never stopped talking to her. And that was 14 years ago. Wow. I've never stopped talking to her ever since then. I've never stopped talking to her. And, you know, I knew after that first conversation, like there's something special about it. And, you know, here's the funny thing. I did not know what she looked like until 30 days into our little phone.
Really?
And this was before Facebook and before all of that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like we couldn't Snapchat, and we couldn't. Yeah. She couldn't like tag me in any of her photos. It was like, okay, this is back on that tip where you were writing letters and putting stamps on and putting like I love yous and all that.
You hit Pony Express tape.
Yeah. So you got jokes, but yeah, it was like, you know, I never stopped talking to her.
Yeah.
You know, and I think what did me in is one night we were hanging out and we were talking about something, and it's kind of like, you know how, I guess when you met your wife, and you know how you just had that flood in your heart, and you're like, oh, yeah. I think for me it was the way she kind of looked at me, and she was just like, and she read me, right? And because like the funny thing is most people don't believe this, but I'm naturally an introvert. Okay, and since we're being transparent, when I'm in a group of people, I'll automatically become the life of the party. But that's only because I want to deflect any sort of real attention towards me.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to be able to admit that.
Yeah.
And now I'm admitting it to the world. But I would typically do that. I would deflect and joke and laugh, ha ha. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? But not necessarily letting anybody come on the inside of me, right?
Right.
Or know who I am really. And I'm kind of playing you at a distance. I'm kind of keeping you over there, deflecting you here, deflecting you there. But she was the only person that ever saw through that. She was like, whatever, you know. And she was like, "Why don't you tell me how you really feel?" Wow. And that's what messed me up. I was like, "She got me. I'm done. Fork. I'm done." Yeah. So that's how I met my wife. It was a blind. It was kind of like a blind sort of. I won't call it a blind date, but it was like, "Hey, you should call so and so." And I wasn't going to do it at first, but I'm glad I did. You know, I'm glad I did.
He let you do it, man. He got you, man. He got you.
You know, and we've been through thick and thin together. You know, everything from, you know, the loss of a child. We had to bury a child right after birth, to, you know, just experiencing a whole manner of things. And she's still putting up with me, you know, and that's, for me personally, I love you for that if you're watching, you know, because, you know, it's kind of like those deep-seated things, right? When you're used to like a pattern where women kind of, you know, you have them for a little while, but then it's like all of a sudden it's kind of bounce.
Yeah.
And I, you know, I still don't have an answer for that, but, you know, it's an awesome feeling to know that there's somebody out there for you.
Yeah. That's
for you. That's pulling for you better than anybody else.
Yeah.
And you know that you can, your heart, I think there's a scripture, his heart does safely trust in her. Yeah. And that's I truly feel that way about my wife.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Isn't that cool?
How and when is what brought you to coming to the Lord?
That attempted murder charge in 2000. Like I said before, I had always gone to church. I even attended this thing called Young Life growing up. You know, Young Life is basically a nationally recognized youth group, a youth ministry, where they go into the different high schools and whatnot, and you just basically you meet in different people's homes and you learn about Jesus. And you know, they used to have different retreats that we would go on. So I actually accepted Christ in November of 1991. But it's kind of like there's a difference between accepting Christ, but then also having no-so salvation, right? Like no-so, like I have a bona fide relationship with the God of the universe. There's a difference when you're a kid, like, oh, okay, I'll say the prayer, but then getting to that point where you're actually walking in the things of God. You know, there were different prophetic things that went over my life from the age of 15 to 16, where said things like I was going to be a missionary to Africa, I was going to be a missionary in the Caribbean, and you know,
Caribbean would be nice.
and preach the gospel and basically be an evangelist.
Yeah.
And up until that point of that court case and those felony charges, you know, I hadn't experienced none of that. I was basically struggling. I was struggling on the inside of me.
Yeah.
I was struggling with the relationship that I was in. I was just struggling, just trying to survive, man. Because it was one of those types of things where, you know, you ask yourself, am I really just going to go on? Am I going to continue with this life? Because this life is meaningless for me.
Yeah.
And that's what I struggle with every day. And when that situation happened, like I said before, I was looking at 15 years in prison, you know, and I said, Lord, if you can get me out of this one, I'll serve you. I'll cut all that nonsense out. I'll try my best. And, you know, to this day, most people, when they look at that look at the arrest record that I have, because there's some things I haven't gone into.
Yeah.
But look at my arrest record.
Yeah.
Things like the anger and things like that, rage and all of that, fighting stuff. And they look at the charges that I eventually got because of that situation. You know, they wonder, like, how is it that the judge saw fit to take your class 2 felony, bust it down to a simple assault, and order you to anger management? Right?
Yeah.
And it's funny to me because I have a lot of buddies that are out there, friends from yay high, that debate things like Christianity, that say Christianity is the white man's religion. Christianity is, well, the Bible was written by King James. Okay, but here's my challenge to you guys. Okay, when you talk about bona fide miracles, when you talk about a true move of God, you cannot debate. You can debate Scripture all day, but you cannot debate signs and wonders. Okay, God delivered me from those charges. And I didn't have to serve a day in jail. Now I did have 3 years probation. I had to check in with the parole officer and stuff like that. I had to have my hands registered with the state, you know, because of what happened. And I was told that if I got into any more trouble, that's what I had hanging over my head. But I didn't go through all of that. In fact, what happened was my parole officer was like, you know, Mr. Monroe, it seems like the only thing you seem to do is go home, you take care of your daughter, and you go to work. So I don't even see a need to even call you anymore, just stay out of trouble. So for me having to go see her for a period of 3 years, I think we lasted on that for a good 6 months.
Wow.
And then she was like, just don't get in any more trouble. I won't on a limb here, just not. So we're just gonna knock it down to unsupervised probation. We're gonna call it a day. Right? But then that was 2000. But in 2001, I was a missionary to Mombasa, Kenya, East Africa, with Faith Landmarks, the church that I now attend. Right? And then I think back to when I was 15. You're going to be a missionary for Christ. You know, you're going to be evangelist. You're going to reach people all over the world. And now now we're looking at what, 15 years later, Mombasa, Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, Manila, Philippines, Ghana, Accra, Ghana. That's in West Africa. Paramaribo, Suriname. That's a country in South America between French and British Guyana. San Pedro Sula, Honduras.
Wow.
You know, and then all the layovers in between, where you get an opportunity to minister to people. I remember being in, I was over in the Netherlands, and I was talking to this Muslim woman that, you know, they were basically asking questions about Jesus, and I'm like, okay, here I'm in the Netherlands, and I'm talking to a woman who was a Muslim, and she's asking about Jesus, and I'm sitting here waiting to catch my flight. And I'm like, cool. And it was kind of funny because I was like, well, who do you say Jesus is? And she said, well, he's a prophet. So then the question was, well, is he a true or false prophet? He's a true prophet. Okay. Do you believe what he said about himself? She got silent. I said, go read about it.
Man.
If he's a true prophet, then that means you'll be able to believe what he said about himself.
Yeah.
And you go study. I mean, so it's pretty cool that, you know, that the Lord has allowed me to see, to be all over the world.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, Harstad, Norway.
Yeah.
You know, Canada. You know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty cool. To circle back to, you know, there's this young man coming from Charlottesville, Virginia, who has a history, who has a past, and he's looking to make a better life for himself. So now you reach so many, you're making friends all over the world, and people, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's humbling. I mean, I don't boast in it. It's humbling for me.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, how could he use me? Because I got issues, man.
Yeah.
I got issues. I mean, we all do, but.
When you told me too, we were joking the one day. He was like, "Yeah, I feel like I'm being called to be a pastor." Just to let y'all know, a pastor doesn't necessarily have to have a church gathering.
Yeah.
What we deem to be church gatherings today, and it just means watching over a flock.
Yeah.
You know, with God, and it's really we're not really shepherds. It's Him.
Yeah.
Working
Yeah.
through us. But I remember the time you told me that, and I started joking. I said, "Don't you know He led you right into doing it?"
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm still trying to get my head around it.
You still you're pastoring people here in the barbershop. I mean, you're watching over the people who work here, and you know it's funny because you listen to them. I mean, sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't, but they're watching.
Yeah. And
you're constantly feeding them. They're constantly being fed. People walk in the doors, constantly fed. And you thought you could run from it. Nah, you know what's funny? He led you right into it. You didn't even know it, my friend.
Right.
That's the cool part about our journey,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, it's so funny that, you know, like we talked about the vision. He gave you a vision. You didn't know how you would get there.
Right.
You know, some of the stuff is our fault. We make mistakes. Some of us not. It ranges from the just and unjust.
True.
That's the amazing part. And then, really, if we're in Christ, we're going to suffer. We're going to go through stuff that, man, it's crazy. But that's part of our journey.
It's part of it, yeah.
Yeah, and you have a lot of triumphs, man.
Yeah, but I do agree though. Like it's kind of like along with those journeys, there's grace to see you through it as well.
Exactly.
Like when I think about the single fatherhood, I think about the trials and the court cases. I think about even some things that I experienced, like for example in corporate America, where like just kind of going through that, working a corporate America job, and not wondering why I'm not getting promotions and this and that, and then seeing God actually move.
Yeah.
And taking those lessons and then multiplying my income 3 times, and all of those things that I was struggling with actually become easy in the job that I'm actually doing.
Yeah.
Because I went through it before. So
there's
grace to go through the suffering when you're going through it.
Exactly.
But the idea is that you don't give up on it, and you just keep moving.
Yep. You just want to keep on seeing Him and trusting Him and leaning on Him.
Yeah.
That is amazing, man. Stuff. We chop it up so much. At home. We chop up a lot, Is there any more questions, anything, Tim, that you have?
Why barbering?
Hey, man. I've questioned that myself, right? let me say it like this. My dad used to cut our hair. And, that's back in the early 90s late 80s, early 90s when those funky hairstyles started coming out, like the high top fades and stuff like that. And, it was perfectly natural for me at like the age of 14 and 15 to try to create those hairstyles on my own.
Yeah.
Not that my dad can do, but my dad was more traditionalist. He would do, the fade haircut, things like that. But then we wanted designs, and we wanted this, and we wanted that. So, barbering to me was always like art because, I like to draw and stuff like that. And so, and learning how to cut hair, I'm on this endless pursuit for the perfect fade, the perfect haircut, the perfect lineup. And, for me, barbering presents that mental challenge, but it also, like when you're really doing a good job with it, the client that you're working with, they can also see it too. And it's not to say that I haven't jacked up a many a head. My brothers can attest to that, and they're probably laughing right now because, hey, my brother after me, my brother Greg, he caught it. he would catch the plugs. I mean, he would catch the ball heads because I messed up, you know. And he just got to the point where you are not going to touch my head anymore. And I think he just recently started letting me cut his hair again. When he came in like a couple weeks ago, we're in our 40s now. But for me, barbering is not a game. Barbering is a legitimate profession. You know, it's about service. It's about like the four things that we base the premise of the shop on, like, you know, the shaving aspect of it. Like, you can't really go anywhere and get a classic hot shave anymore. Yeah. Right? Yeah. There's an art to that. The barbering aspect, like styling the hair, you know, making sure that that person feels their best when they get out of the chair. Here's the funny thing. I can't really speak for other communities, but for the African American community, that's a brother's spot. You know, we like to go in and sit in the chair and let that barber take 30 minutes and let that buzz from the clipper put us to sleep. And if a barber's worth his salt, he's gonna put you to sleep. Yeah. With the buzz and with his touch and making sure that everything in your hair looks nice, because a lot of times, like, if you look at things like, you know, Jim Crow, the Black Code, segregation, the whole nine, where African American men were just constantly getting beat down by society, the barbershop was a safe haven for you to literally let your hair down. Okay? And you can be among men with like passions, so we talk about the different things, coping mechanism, right? And be able to get the type of haircut that made you look fresh. Yeah. And you walk out, like, I know for me, when we was growing up, it was always cool to have a fresh haircut and to have on, you know, some nice gear with some fresh sneakers. I mean, and I'm still like that in my 40s. You know, my brothers are like that. My friends are like that. You know, and it all begins with how my hair looks, and does my outfit complement what I'm wearing? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So, with that said, you know, barbering for me is about not only ministering to the outer appearance, but also ministering to the inner part too. Yeah. Right? Because you'd be surprised some of the things people start to talk to you about just randomly, and you're like, whoa, like, okay, like, this dude is really having a heavy day. Like, how can I make him feel better? Or if you know somebody's kind of down in their luck and they got their last $15 just so they can look fresh for that job interview. Yeah. And then that gives you an opportunity to say, you know what, keep your money. You go ahead and let me know how that job interview goes. And let me know when you get it. You know? That's what it's about. Yeah. It's not about, you know, gimmicks. We talk about it all the time. We're not a barbershop that has a bunch of gimmicks. Right. This barbershop is about classic barbering, man. You know, it's about you know, loving on people when they come in. Because when you walk through that door, you're a family. You're going to get greeted like your family. We're going to love on you like your family. And if you're a Dallas Cowboy, we're going to try to convert you to become a Redskins fan. All right?
I've seen that too many times, man.
Yeah, so, you know, hey, it's a Redskins shop. No offense. You know, but yeah, I mean, that's what barbering is about for me. It's really an avenue of approach. It's really an avenue for us to be able to basically get that good word in somebody's ear.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, but it's a pathway. But like I said, you know, that might be the only semblance of rational conversation that a person might get throughout that whole 2 weeks.
Correct.
They come here, and it's hopefully that they get it. Yep. And so I encourage the guys that are here to keep it family, to keep it encouraging, to keep it, you know, keep an environment where it's something that empowers a person and they feel better than when they was and they came. Yep. You know, so because if anybody comes in with negativity, man, we try to get them out of here quick. Yeah. Say, hey, look, you know, we can't have that here. Yeah. You know, it's a protected environment. You know? Yeah. But that's what barbering is for me.
So we're gonna wrap it up because I know the time wise and stuff. Yeah. I'm getting hungry again, but that's the thing. I'm always hungry. But last word of advice for somebody who's in their journey, going through stuff. What would you tell them, man? What would be your advice and what you experienced? Keep it short, keep it sweet, but just give them something that they can hang on to that, you know, that may help them get through it.
I mean, you said keep it short. I'm gonna try, but you know, it's kind of like this for me. I'm on an endless pursuit to understand God's character. You know, it's one thing to read the Bible. It's one thing to memorize scripture and stuff like that. But you know, I'm still getting over the fact that God actually loves me. Yeah. And that's just being real. Like, that is so beyond me that God loves me. And that there is, like, he doesn't judge me. I mean, the word does judge, but as far as me, he loves me for me, who I am, and accepts me for what I am.
Yeah.
And it doesn't absolve me from responsibility of reading his word and becoming it, or listening to him and praying and becoming what he tells me to become. But it's the fact that he loves me, man. And, you know, that's, I can't say that for anybody, you know, not my parents, not anything.
Yeah.
Because God loves me unconditionally, right? And even when I screw up, I mean, I can ask him for his forgiveness, and it is what it is. It's exactly what it is, because I received it by faith.
Yeah.
You know, and like I said, man, we all got things that we're working on, man. Like, I'm working on some major stuff on the inside, but I realize that there's things that I can't do beyond me, because to be man is to be a man is to be spiritual, because you're gonna have some things that you run into as a man that require strength greater than yours.
Yeah.
And it's, for me right now, anyone that's looking for that type of deep love, really pursue God's character, pursue his heart.
Yeah.
You know, understand who he is and why, what his plan is for your life.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many different things that's challenging that right now. Like, you know, we talked about this yesterday. All lives matter, Black Lives Matter. It's kind of funny because with the Black Lives Matter thing, I'm starting to see a transition back to people starting to look back into like ancestral religions, tribal religions, and things of that nature. And so my only question around that is, well, interesting. Do you think that this particular journey that we're on got you to this point, so that way you can really see what's truly for you, versus reverting back to those different things that was there before?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I know what tribe I came from Africa, you know, the Igbo tribe, Nigeria, whatever.
Yeah.
But I believe that, you know, again, you cannot debate signs and wonders, and God is forever showing me the magnitude of who he is, the reality of who he is.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that I'm all the way there, because I'm not.
Yeah.
But I'm hungry for his presence, Brother Josh. You know, I'm hungry for him to really continue to show himself strong to me.
Yeah.
Because there's some deep-seated things that he has delivered me from, and there's still yet more things to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm like, God, I know you're going to work the situation out. I don't know how you're going to do it, but I know you got it.
Yeah.
And so before we can walk in any sort of relationship, we must first have trust.
Yeah.
And I'm like, God, I know you're saying that you trust me with your word, the most holy things. But I don't know, the Lord, that I trust myself. And so get me to the point where I have the same level of trust that you have in me, that I can have that same level of trust in you.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm at. So, you know, this is just a real Christian man just giving it to you straight. That's how I think. And so it's like I can't go back to anything else, because he's shown himself too true for me.
Correct.
He's shown himself too much.
Yeah.
And it's like, my whole thing is now is like, no, I just don't want to displease him.
Yeah.
You know, that's my heart. I don't want to displease him. And even though I fall short sometimes, I need to keep walking in such a way that it honors him.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
This thing is all about love, man. You know, the whole thing. This whole thing. Without love, this whole thing shuts down.
Yep.
You know, his love for me.
So with that, man, the best thing we can tell you, you're going through your journey, and we're gonna have more of these. We're gonna try to do more of these in the future, maybe at least once a month, and have, you know, different people in their talks and walks of life, which is gonna be fun for all of us, I think, personally.
Yeah.
The biggest thing going through your journey, man, is know that he loves you. I mean, that's gonna get you through it.
Yeah.
That alone. I mean, we've been talking about that for several weeks now, and just abiding in his love. We talked about this morning, abiding in his love, and allowing that love to just carry you through.
Yeah.
I mean, it's gonna help you love others. It's gonna help you to bear fruit. I mean, it's gonna help you do all kinds of stuff. Even just know that he's with you, for you.
Yeah.
And so if you're going through stuff, you know, hey, you're from online, you know, go ahead. You can message us privately. We talk stuff. If you don't feel comfortable talking to people, message us privately, or you can talk to there. We're all here together to work together. We're a church, man.
Right.
Even if we meet different gathering spots, man, we're still a church as a whole. And I think that's cool, because you go somewhere else and we're here, yet we work together like there's no walls. And I think that's what God wants anyways. And he wants to see his church, and Jesus wants to see his bride doing. So with that, we want to thank you so much for coming and joining us. If you want to give offering, there's a link above us. You can give your offering. Just lead by your heart where the Holy Spirit's leading you to do whatever you need to do. We thank you, George. Thank you so much, man.
Yeah.
I know it's on the fly. You're not used to this, but this is cool, though. I know you're a private person, but we thank you so much for that and everything.
Anytime.
And we thank you for coming and joining us tonight. We hope that, you just lean on his love in your journey, and we're here. We're all here. You can actually go to George Westland Barbershop Facebook page, and if you got stuff you want to talk to him directly, you can talk to him directly. He's open and honest, man. I just have to beat up on him to check it, but that's all good. That's allow me to do that, and I'll help you out and stuff too as well. We just want to say that we love you. We hope you have an amazing week. Lean on his love for you. Let that carry you in your life.
Amen.
And if you didn't know Jesus today, believe me, if you feel it in your heart now, man, go ahead, man. You call out to him. He's going to speak to you directly. We trust that. And we trust the Holy Spirit more than we trust ourselves on this stuff. So we love you. Take care of yourself, and we'll see y'all next Sunday. Peace. Y'all gotta do it.